Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us. I really hope you enjoyed the film. We're here with an amazing panel, so we're hoping for some great discussions. I encourage you all to participate. Put your hands up if you want to ask a question, pop some of your thoughts into the chat. I just want to give some shout outs to Rich Mix London at the Docklands, the Museum of London's, and this film is possible by the BFI, Doc Society and BBC Arena. I encourage you to hashtag A Time to Testify, Be a Witness, an African Apocalypse Tour, and No Justice, No Peace. So let me jump right in and introduce the amazing stellar panel that we have this evening. So first of all, I want to introduce to you Glenroy Watson. He is the Secretary of the Global African Congress, the UK chapter, and he's also the Secretary for RMT London Underground Black Union. History. Did I get that right, Glenroy? I really hope I did. And then we have the amazing and beautiful Alima. She is the curator at the Sugar and Savory Gallery. She's also a PhD researcher, historian, and also she is the amazing bad gal that had the wonderful statue made of her in response to pulling down the Edward Colson statue in Bristol. So let's give it up for her. We have Dr. Les, Professor of Criminology and Sociology at West London, also known and dubbed affectionately by Black History Studies as the Warrior Scholar of Black History. We have Rob Limkin, who is the producer and co-writer of the African Apocalypse. And last but by no means least, we have sorry guys, we have Anya Kachi, excuse me, the Executive Director at the African Fund for Development and writer of African Diaspora Issues. But last but not least, we have Femi, the co-writer and director of African Apocalypse. And it's also his birthday, so let's give him a round of applause. And can everyone send him beautiful messages in the chats? Welcome all. So I'm going to dive right in. Everybody unmute. All the panelists, if you could please unmute, that will be fantastic. And I'm going to throw out to you, Glenroy. What did you think of the film?
I think there's a word that's going around called epic, and I think it fits into this. I've seen this some time ago, as Femi will tell you, and it was fantastic. I think the soundtrack is amazing. It brings you a sort of live feel that you're there, you know. And Femi, I'm still asking, can you get the soundtracks done separately so people can just hear that? Beautiful movie, but the soundtrack for me was the most powerful messages. And I'd love to be able to listen to that, you know, whenever I can. The other thing it opens up, and I suspect we'll get to that a little bit more, is some of the hidden history. To hear Femi talk about what happened in Namibia, for example, a country that I'm very much acquainted with, and know that something will be done about that history. Fantastic. So, yeah, epic.
And Dr. Les, what were your views?
First, I want to say greetings to everyone, and I give thanks for the invite. And to, is it Rob and Femi? But Femi, I have to say, for me, this is just a wonderful account. And when I was watching it, I watched it a couple of days ago. You put me right back to the mid-1980s when I met the most wonderful human being, was a guy called Professor Herbert Ekwe. He passed away suddenly last year. But I did a course with him in the 1980s called African Literature Across the Diaspora. Is there a Black aesthetic? And one of the things he did with that course was we read Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. But what he did is, you know, you've compared and contrasted it with a real account from, you know, the French guy, I can't remember his name, I've used him before. But what Prof. Ekwe did was he used the story of Leopold. And what was really interesting about that was he kind of dealt with that history 13 years before the most famous book was published, King Leopold's Ghost. So I was actually introduced to, you know, what happened to our brothers and sisters in, you know, the Belgian Congo. And so when I watched your film, you put me right back into that historical moment. And I think that, for me, sets this film apart from others, because you use that account of the Heart of Darkness and you gave us the reality that made the Heart of Darkness look like, I don't know, a Sunday school trip. So I really give thanks for the wonderful insights that, you know, we gleaned from that film. It was fantastic to me. Thank you.
Thank you. And I go to Onyekechi. How did you find the film?
I thought the film was excellent. Cinematically, it looked wonderful. I agree with Glenroy about the music from Tunde Jagade, and Glenroy, it's actually available on a lot of an old CD he made called Lamentations. A lot of the tracks are available on there. But and for me, it was a great. It was great to be guided by Femi. I thought he was a great guide for this into one version of a Heart of Darkness in Africa. A lot of this was like revisiting some work that I had done at the beginning of this century for Radio 4, where we were in the footsteps of Kurtz and in the Heart of Darkness. So
Yeah.
there were a lot of resonances, and it was nice to get an African now going in to look at this. I mean, there are issues I have with that as well, but we can talk about those later. But it was just a really powerful film, and Rob, it just looked visually stunning. So thank you both for a really great story.
Thank you. And Alima.
Yes, just a quick note. I wasn't responsible for the Colston. I don't want to claim that for Robert Milligan, but yeah, I think I agree with what really the others said. I think for me, as I was watching the documentary, I was more kind of thinking about history more critically, and thinking about history as a verb. And as you were kind of making these footsteps, I was inclined to kind of reflect on my own positionality, because I feel like you touched a lot upon having access to this lived realm of what it means to be Black and in Britain today. And for me, as someone whose heritage as a Jamaican removed from Africa, and thinking about being configured in this similar kind of colonial project, I was thinking more critically about history, and how for many of us who look like me, we share this very fractured relationship with history. And for many of us, we've actually come to a point where we cannot trust history. So as you were kind of making this journey, I was thinking more critically about history and the possibilities of reparative history, and how we sometimes it's not necessarily about, you know, finding the answers, but actually asking ourselves like a new set of questions, which I'm sure we can get into as it progresses, but as this kind of event progressed. But yeah, I think I was more thinking more critically about history and what is history, and how can we do history, and how we can, I guess, reimagine a decolonizing practice that kind of moves beyond seeing whiteness as a starting point as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed watching it, and I found myself, I found like I was on that journey with you as well, which I really loved.
Excellent, excellent. And Rob, tell us, what inspired you to get behind this film and produce it?
Well, look, actually, just before I answer that, Sarah, let me just say to Glenroy, I think what we should do, as Onyekechi has already said, Tunde's music is all on CDs and Spotify. And I think what we should do, we'll do over the next few days, is we'll make a Spotify, if anybody's on Spotify, we'll make a Spotify playlist of all the tracks. I don't think Tunde Jagade hasn't really given us permission to kind of release the soundtrack, because we were using songs that he'd already recorded. but he changed a few of them, but they are basically all still available. I think what we wanted to do at the beginning of this, trying to make this film, was to basically really just make the point that try and make a film that basically said that, you know, colonialism isn't history. As Alima just said, you know, history is a verb and colonialism is now. And what do we do about it? What does everybody in the world do about it? Because colonialism, unlike probably, you know, many other wrongs in history, colonialism has kind of created the world that we all live in, and lots of things come from it. Slavery, you know, capitalism, even you could say, all international capitalism, all of these things have come from it. And so we wanted to try and find a way to make a story that would kind of really be a springboard for thinking about that. When we started on the film, it was some years ago. It's taken several years to make this film, about 7 years all in all. So it didn't seem like talking about colonialism as being the present. It didn't seem like a very, very mainstream thing to do. But you know, I think by the time we've now finished it, of course, the world now realizes that it really is. And I hope that the film can play its part in continuing this this movement for finding a better and more just world that we can all live in together.
Thank you. And Femi, tell us, what was your inspiration behind making film?
So I got involved in looking at anti-colonial kind of activism and post-colonial history and all this stuff at university when I was involved in the Rhodes Must Fall movement about the statue of Cecil Rhodes. And I know we've got some statue discussions today and stuff that happened in Bristol as well. And then off the back of that, I got more and more into this world of colonialism. And by the time I'd graduated, rather than most Oxford grads who go off and become consultants, I was living on a boat in Oxford, writing poems about France Afrique, i.e. the post-colonial state of French Africa, and heading down to London once a week to be on the panel of the IDPAD coalition with Glenroy. So I actually worked with Glenroy quite closely for many months a few years ago. So I was kind of in that world of Pan-Africanism and anti-colonial activism and making art based on it. And then lo and behold, I was performing an open mic night in a bar in Oxford, and Rob's partner happened to be there, hearing me sing a song about Congo and and another song about French Africa. And we got in contact, we started chatting, and we ended up making the film together. So that's kind of my foray into the world of colonialism and post-colonialism.
Brilliant. Excellent. Excellent. So since the idea has come up, obviously one of the things that has been a running theme throughout the tour is Voulet's grave. That is a kind of like a monument. I don't know if a monument's the right word, but it is definitely there in Niger. And we've had the Rhodes Must Fall, we've had Boycott the Human Zoo, we've had Why is My Curriculum So White? So there is constant change about decolonizing how things are seen. How do we feel about the role that statues and monuments play in shaping the way in which we interpret the legacy of colonialism? And I'm going to go to Dr. Les.
Right, well, to be honest, I usually do a lot of stuff with the media, BBC, ITV, whatever. But since the murder of our brother George Floyd and a lot of other stuff, I've refused. So I haven't done anything for mainstream media since March. And it was a deliberate discussion and a decision, because I thought that what was happening in the mainstream arena was very trivial. And for me, it was really disrespectful. For me, as an African person, you know, born in Britain, living through, you know, whatever it is we want to say. So when they started to discuss, should the statues come down, best example I can give you was I was contacted by a major red top newspaper to speak on it. And what I basically said to them is, it's quite simple for me. I would leave the statues there. But what I would do is I would make it a teachable moment where in the 21st century, you could put something there that people could scan on their phones and introduce them to the history of why that statue is there. But what people want to do is they want to pull down the statues, change all the road names. In 5 years' time, people won't have a clue. So then that history, that aspect of what we as Africans went through to build this edifice called Europe, because Rob touched on it briefly, you know, without our ancestors being chattel slaves, there would not be the modern Europe that we've got. And Britain was at the forefront of that. And those statues speak to that history. So to me, I am not for just taking them down. To me, it should be a teachable moment. If it isn't, I just don't have no time for it.
Thank you. I agree. I don't think we necessarily need to remove it because it's almost like we kind of whitewash it a little bit and people forget about the history. Onyekachi, what's your opinion of the remaining or keeping the statues there? Do you think that Valet's grave should be removed or should it be kept?
Well, I agree with Les, but I slightly disagree as well. I started something called African Remembrance Day back in 1995, where we basically remember the victims of this period, because one of the things that has been ignored has been the millions who died in all of this. And I'm glad that Femi and Rob began to tell their stories. But we did Remembrance Day and we went around the country raising this issue. We went to Bristol and said to the Lord Mayor who came to the service that we had, why is it that all over this city, the monuments to people, monsters really, who killed millions, hundreds of thousands of people and nothing to the victims. And he didn't have a response to that question, but we did start a process in Bristol with others to bring down these statues. So it was a genuine, an innocent question to him. He went red and didn't have an answer. And we knew then that this was going to be a big issue as you went forward. I was interested in something that a Bristolian said when Colston's statue came down. And she said that for 50 years, our parents had come here after Windrush and had been looking at all these statues and had been perplexed and wondered, what it was. And they would look at the statues, shake their heads and say, well, perhaps that's just the British and their ways. And then, as I said, in 96, we started a conversation about bringing down the statues. And this conversation went on for 23, 24 years. The Bristolians were taking it up and they were trying to do what Les was saying, which is let's put some information at the bottom and explain the context. And that still didn't happen. So 50 years of wondering what this stuff was about, 23, 25 years of engagement, and then it came down in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think I agree about not forgetting, but it doesn't need to be in the public square. It could be in a museum.
I agree.
Because you put it in the public square and you're making a statement about who you are. And it's not about the past, because the past has gone, all those people are dead. It's about the present and your values in relation to the present. So you're also saying something about who you are by keeping the statues up. And I'm perplexed by why Britain and the sense of self-esteem is so wrapped up in celebrating a Colston who kills 20,000 people. I just don't understand. I'm like the Windrush generation is trying to get my head around that one.
Okay, Alima, I'm going to go to you next. Thank you. I'm going to go to you next because, as I quite rightly got it wrong, you did not tear down the statue, but there was a lot of controversy surrounding you and the statue. What are your views and what do you think about these monuments? Should they stay? Should they be put in museums? I'm of the idea to put them in museums with addendums, but what's your...
I mean, from the position of the statue that I was specifically involved in is the Robert Milligan statue that was situated directly outside of the Museum of London Docklands, which is a place where I work. And for me, I guess I'm in between what both Professor Les and Onyekachi was saying. So I find it, when we're discussing these statues, I find it more interesting to look at it from the perspective of a citizenship and a citizen and who is a citizen. And for me, I find myself kind of critically engaging with the relationship between memory and what is seen as citizenship, and who can be a citizen and what does it mean to be a citizen within the backdrop of colonial trauma. And for me, when we look at areas such as Docklands, for instance, that gives us this glimpse into this, into Britain's kind of colonial past and present. Honoring somebody such as Robert Milligan, a slave master, I think what's often overlooked within these narratives, for people who look like me, of these histories of rupture, of denial, of refusal, of entanglement, if you want to call it. So for me, it's about, if we're thinking about the untold stories of our ancestors in relation to the citizenship and relation to the statue, is that just citizenship? Is it just citizenship for somebody who is conscripted into this colonial project, like how we all are as Africans, to be faced with these statues honoring slave masters? And I think for me, on that kind of level, I would say that, so the decision for the museum is that I'm now part of an advisory board that's now looking at acquiring this statue as a part of the Museum of London Docklands, to situate it and to be able to contextualize it within its history. But I think for me, yeah, as looking at it on a ground level of citizenship, of what it means to honor statues such as this and just citizenship, I wouldn't advocate for such a glorious statue as these slave masters to be in these public realms. I feel like Britain is not at a stage to articulate these histories in a public space such as this. There's too many other violence. There's too many other triggering violence that we're faced with on top of these big monuments. So I feel like, yeah, it needs to be more embedded into the curriculum and museums and places of learning, as opposed to public spaces.
I love that, what you said about contextualizing it, because on the streets, just up there loftily looking down on us, there is no context.
Right. And if you look at the contextualizing of the Milligan statue, what was written was thanking him for his guardian care. So it's, yeah.
Trash. Okay, Glenroy. Let's just call it what it is. Glenroy, quickly, what are your views?
Well, I understand what Les is saying. I don't agree. Some years ago, I was trying to book a ticket to go to Leningrad, and none of the travel agents knew anything about it. Couldn't find it on the map. They didn't know where is this. And it suddenly occurred to me that they had changed the name to St. Petersburg. They changed it back from Leningrad. Now, I've never seen a statue of Adolf Hitler, but everyone knows who he is.
Right.
I think the idea that somehow this will take away the history, which rightly we should know and we should learn. We shouldn't let history pass without not teaching ourselves about what happened and how we failed to do it. But I don't think a monument is actually necessary. What the Barbadians have done, and I love when I go back there to go to Bridgetown and see the place that Nelson's old statue used to be. I mean, their first act was to turn it around from looking out to sea, and now finally I understand it's in a museum. So in case I've not been sort of clear, I'm in favor of removing all of these edifices to replace them with appropriate things. History can be ensured that people understand where it's coming from. I don't think we need an edifice to do that. So a museum idea, I could go along with that. I mean, I didn't have any problem with it being thrown in the Bristol Bay, but other people had different idea and want it further. So I understand the argument about the history. let's make sure we understand it, because we don't want to have that repeated.
Right.
But the idea that a statue somehow, and I know that Les has got his hand up, the idea that is an aide memoir is not something I support.
Okay, I'm going to go to Femi, Rob, and then back to you, Dr. Leslie, if that's okay. And then we're going to open it up. We'll take some questions from the audience. Please put your hands up and get involved. Femi, what were you going to say about the statues?
So it was very clear to me, because I was involved in Rhodes Must Fall both in 2015, as is mentioned in the film, and also in Rhodes Must Fall in 2020 when it kicked off again. And the main thing you could see from the media was that the first time round, they were talking about Rhodes as a benefactor and as a donor. And the conversation had to then be had where we're like, no, actually, he's a colonizer, colonialist who did this, that, and the rest. And the goalpost of who Rhodes was, the actual history and how we understand him, was not just changed, but rectified by virtue of these public debates, which came as a result of us asking them to remove this statue. We say, remove the statue. They go, why? We say, this person did this, this, and this. So that the second time Rhodes Must Fall happened in 2020, the newspaper started with Cecil Rhodes was a colonialist who did this in South Africa, rather than Cecil Rhodes was a benefactor to Oriel College. So I think that the call, there haven't been, I mean, I would say that probably one of the biggest public discussions about European colonialism in Europe at large has happened in the past few months, and that happened as a result of the fact that the George Floyd protests happened. But then in Bristol, the statue of Colston was toppled, which led to statues coming down in Belgium, across the UK, and that's been accompanied with a discussion on colonialism, which has rectified the history and which has kind of brought to the forefront who King Leopold was, who Cecil Rhodes was, who Codrington was, who Codrington in Oxford, and who Colston was in Bristol. So I think that it's the opposite to say that we're erasing history by asking for these statues to come down. The people erasing history are the Niall Fergusons of the world, the people who are saying colonialism was fine, people who are saying, look, we built railroads, this, that, the rest. And what we're actually doing is we're rectifying history, and we're saying, no, these aren't acceptable because of these crimes. In the same way that, as Glenroy pointed out, Germany said, okay, we don't agree with Adolf Hitler anymore, so we're going to take down his statues. And now it's a fact of history that they removed all of the Weimar buildings and all the SWAT stickers and all this, that, the rest, because of the reality of what Hitler did. So I think that removing the statues is a way of actually recognizing the history.
Thank you so much. Rob, we're going to come to you. I do apologize, I introduced you incorrectly as so you are the director producer of the African Apocalypse, so please accept my apologies. What do you think about all the, obviously you've been involved in the film from its conception, what is your take on the whole Vuille's grave, the statues, the monuments, Rhodes Must Fall? What do you think?
Well, I think Vuille's grave and, for example, the statues of Cecil Rhodes or whoever, is in a way they're a little bit different, but they're also the same. I mean, in the sense that, you know, Rhodes basically, when people talk about kind of cancelling history, or cancelling the history of Britain by taking the Rhodes statue down, the reality is that the statue is a statue to the cancellation of other people's history. Because that's really what happened when Rhodes decided to sort of say that imperialism was going to be the answer to Britain's problems back in 1890. He actually said, if we living in Britain want to avoid civil war, then everybody who is against civil war in Britain must be in favor of imperialism. So the way that Britain went forward was by cancelling the histories and cultures of many, many other societies. I think in the same way, Vuille is sitting there, or his grave is lying there in the middle of a town in Niger, cancelling the history of, or cancelling the possibility, should we say, of the community there. And that's very clearly made that's a point is made in the end of the film by the people who live around that. I would say, yeah, by all means, let's take the statues down and put them in museums and turn it into teachable moments again and again and again, but let's put another statue up. Let's put other statues, or whether they're statues or representations of something that actually represent the kind of world that we want to live in now, because those statues represent the cancellation of so many histories that are completely unacknowledged. And I think that the same space should be replaced by things that are monuments to the histories and the futures and the presents that we actually want.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much. Les, are you going to respond? There is a call.
It'll take me 2 minutes
to
just qualify my perspective.
Okay.
Because it's not about avoiding an erasure. I'm an African person. My name is William Alastair Anthony Henry. For years, I've said I don't want any monuments. So I've been invited on panels where people are talking about spending 6 million on this and how much millions on pulling up an anchor from the Windrush. I say, why not invest in an educational institute and teach people the histories rather than having these very public symbols? Now, my point is this, and Glenroy, you know, you spoke about Barbados. What I really found interesting about that was they've removed that statue. Who read it out? Dame somebody. What is a dame? A dame is a female version of a knight. Why would you want that title? So to me, when people get wrapped up and focused on the very public-facing statues, the symbols, they miss all the other stuff, the important stuff. Why would an African person want to be a sir, knowing what sirs did to us as Africans? So that is my point. The broader point is, I am not into symbolic changes. I am not into them. To me, the changes have to be structural. So yeah, you can take the statue and put it in a museum, and it's fine if you replace it with something else. But then those two lots of information need to be there so people understand the context. I was born in the womb of a very scornful mother in Lewisham, and I cannot forget that. And walking up, you know, I used to play in One Tree Hill Park. When I discovered that Queen Elizabeth was central to my enslavement as an African, my whole perspective on Queen Elizabeth changed. I've written about it before. But the point is, I'm not going to say go and change the name of One Tree Hill Park because Queen Elizabeth sat there one day and they made the whole of that area Honor Oak Park. To me, I can't really buy into that. To me, it has to be a teachable moment because there are too many people in too many power positions who basically determine what history is. Remember, Napoleon said, history is a set of lies agreed upon.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't know that about, is it Honor Oak? I didn't know that.
Honor Oak Park, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I used to play there as a child. I never ever knew
well, you
that.
See, I grew up on Devonshire Road.
Oh, wow.
In Forest Hill.
South London or South East Londoners, mate. It's all about
absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have some comments. I really want to encourage everybody in the event to pop you'll see a poll come up just now. If you could fill those out for us, so do fill them out, and feel free at any point when we're discussing to jump into the chats, and we will endeavour to read out your comments. So here's a bit of a controversial question, guys, and I'm going to throw it out to Alima. What do you think the legacy of colonialism has? How does it impact both Black women and men? What is that legacy? And because we have to go there. So what is that legacy of sort of colonialism, imperialism, and how does it affect Black men and women today or globally amongst the diaspora?
That's a very heavy question you're giving me.
I'm gonna say that's an easy one.
Wow.
I was gonna go there. Come on, it's me. I'm gonna go there.
I'm gonna go there. She's taking it there. Wow. Okay. I think there's so many levels to that question that it's probably cannot really be answered in a short way. But I think yeah, exactly as someone said, that's a PhD topic in itself. But I think on a very kind of basic level is thinking about stereotypes and thinking about the way in which a lot of these stereotypes have been, you know, these stereotypes that are so so kind of normalized in everyday society of what a black man is and what a black woman is.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a friend actually who's doing her PhD research on looking at stereotypes of black women, enslaved black women, African women, and looking at stereotypes around like the mammy figure, for instance, and the idea of a strong black woman, and all of these stereotyping are very toxic and very damaging. So I think on a very simple level, stereotype, the way in which black people have been stereotyped, and particularly in terms of gender, um, it's a clear manifestation of colonization and colonialism. Even on I'll take it a little bit further, but even in terms of beauty standards and what is normalized in that aspect, I know that's a whole other conversation about beauty standards and so forth. But yeah, on a very basic, simple level, I think the stereotyping of black men and black women and how we reinforce these stereotypes, and even as ourselves, is perhaps the toxic and damaging thing that I would say.
Yeah, most definitely. I think the beauty standards is a whole nother conversation. One of the things that I think I've picked up on it, and I don't know if it's going to come up in this, one of the impacts that I've seen, especially amongst us as a community, is that whole kind of colorism, shadism, and internal prejudice that we hold towards each other in the community sometimes. I think that is a legacy. That's nothing to do with us. That is a complete legacy that has filtered down in casting systems and things like that. So I'm going to throw that out to you, Glenroy. What do you see as the impact of imperialism and on black men and women?
Well, there's a phrase going on within the African community that I have some difficulty with. We need, obviously, to regain our self pride and know who we are. But I also know that many of us have our self pride and know who we are. So this idea that we're somehow a damaged people, etc., is not a thing I agree with lightly. There are people, obviously, society is doing that. I mean, look at the thing that's happening to currently with the Windrush and so on. We know there are many people, hundreds of people who are hiding because they are frightened to confront the dishonesty of the British government. However, it doesn't mean to me that they are damaged. It means that they're taking a certain action that you and I wouldn't agree with, So I'm very resistant to the idea. It's giving ourselves an handicap. I mean, as Alima said, we're actually telling ourselves that we're short of this and short of that. I don't get up in the morning and conceptualize that. I get up in the morning and say there's a job of work to be done in the continued work of the liberation of our people, and building alliance with people who might be able to assist, but not making that a dependent factor. If people come along and support, then great. But I would avoid the idea that somehow we either lack the ability or the ability to gain the ability, to put it another word. And by the way, I did your poll, and I hope there's some things that we will stop saying. Slave master, what the hell is that? I have no master. My ancestors never had any masters. They call themselves slave masters. We shouldn't join in that. And there was no trade. Yeah, there was nobody sitting by the beach and waiting for boats to come along to do a trade-in. So the poll says, should the UN declare I'm sorry, I've forgotten the term it uses. But just to say, in 2001, and I know perhaps Les and I will disagree about this, we've not talked about this for a long time, but in Durban, in 2001, there was a declaration that enslavement and colonialism were crimes against humanity. And we need to actually
promulgate that, make sure more people understand that, because what that means is that a crime against humanity has no statute of limitation. It means that all of us should be working to bring a resolution, a satisfactory resolution to that. So for me, we're there. Whether greater declaration might help, I don't know. But no, I don't accept the stereotype. There are many, many variants within our community, with all community, and we simply need to elevate the best among us.
Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Les, do you want to respond to that? And then I'm going to go to Onyekachi.
Well, only that I agree with what Glenroy said. I don't know why you'd think I would disagree with that, but you know. But for me, you know, for instance, in 2007, I put out a book called Whiteness Made Simple, right? Stepping into the gray zone. And in that book, I said one thing that I've been quoting forever. Whiteness is the ever-present non-presence that molds and shapes reality. We're all snookered by it. Whether we like it or not, whether we're black, white, however we suggest we present ourselves. Remember, this racialized system, as it is now, and many people don't agree, but with my sociology hat on, my anthropology hat, it's about 400 or 500 years old. This particular system of racialization. And it was created by white middle-class men to organize the world in a particular way. And the world is still organized in that particular way. We're a planetary global minority. You know, the people who classify themselves as white, Caucasians, are about 8% of the planet's population, but they control something like about 85% of the planet's resources. Those are the conversations we need to have, in my humble opinion. So I've written about everything from skin bleaching amongst mostly African communities in the context of Jamaica, where people like now in Jamaica, a lot of poor people, I know Alima knows this, they bleach for Christmas. They bleach their hands, they bleach them face, them neck for Christmas. So we need to think about the legacy of chattel enslavement and how it manifests today. So, you know, I agree with Glenroy. I never get up and think I want to be white or I'm inferior to white people. Inferior to who? You know, Rastafari teaches us knowledge is what liberates us, nothing else. You know, and I've always said knowledge gives us the power to liberate or enslave. It's what you do with the knowledge, in my humble opinion.
Thank That. Onyekachi,
yeah.
You know I'm struggling, right? I just don't publicly apologise.
It's cool. Yeah, I just agree with what Glenroy and Les were saying. I mean, and Les in particular, in terms of, you know, there was a system that was in place. It was in place for a long time. It was an economic system. It was a legal system. What has been really dramatic in the last 20 years, and people say all this stuff happened a long time ago, and it wasn't, because in the last 25 years, we had a big breakthrough in terms of that system, which is that for 400 years or so, African inferiority was codified. And what Africans have been doing is removing that codification in lots of different locations around the world. And that codification ends in 1994 with South Africa. So we have a moment of transition. The economic system is still in place, but the legal system has gone. And so there's some space to talk. And what we're hearing are the voices now of the victims. I was struck by the fact that in 1907, it would have been 100 years since the abolition of the slave trade. And you know, I've gone through the papers. There was no commemoration of that occasion in 1907. Why was there no commemoration? Because Britain was still in the middle of the colonial project and was expanding, and you know, we hadn't yet reached the limits of the empire. And then in 2007, we have a year to reflect on what happened 200 years beforehand. So what happened between 1907 and 2007, we started to hear the voices of the victims. And that process begins with decolonization, with Windrush, and those voices are not going to stop. So that system is being dismantled. We're now hearing what happened to the millions who were, as Rob said, had their histories denied, their futures, their possibilities curtailed. And it's as Kurt says, the taking of the world is not a pretty thing. And so the reckoning is happening. And I've begun to understand that reckoning around 3 R's, which is, first of all, we need to recognize what happened. And then there's the remembrance. We need to remember the victims. And then there's reparations, there's restitution. We need to return artifacts that have been taken. And there's return, which some of the Rastas have tried to do in terms of what happened in that severed African world. There's reconnection between the diaspora and Africa. There's reconstruction. So there are lots of R's that we can look at how we heal what happened during that 400-year period. Mm-hmm. And it's a task that all of us are going to have to embark on. And because these voices will not stop as we remember, as people like Femi go in and look at that past. I'm minded, I'm glad that Femi mentioned that he's a poet, because the last time Dante goes into the Inferno, into hell, he has Virgil as the guide. And so we're going to have lots of poets going in and taking us back into hell, and to see what happened and to really understand this period of history, because we have heard one side of that story, the people who have the statues up, and now we need to hear the other side of what happened, and we're going to be hearing more of that, and we need allies for that. So thank you, Rob, for the film, and because we won't understand the last 500 years without those two sides of the story.
Fabulous. There is a comment, I'm going to put this to you, Rob, from the chat, and it was, if colonialism is a noun and current now and a verb, as in performed in everyday life, what do we do in practical or as praxis to decolonialize our daily existence?
Well, that's a question for me.
Yes, and then I'm going to go to Les, then I'm going to go to Glenroy, Femi, and Alima, and then...
That's as hard as Alima's question. How do we colonize our lives now? Well, basically, I think we have to organize. We have to sort of find, like everybody's been talking about, like Glenroy, Les, Onyekachi, Alima, everybody's been talking about, we have to kind of find ways of taking action together, and whether they're at kind of local levels or whether they're through our workplace or through where our kids go to school or whatever we're doing, we have to find ways of actually becoming very active citizens. Again, picking up what Alima was saying, we have to become very active citizens and find ways of building coalitions amongst each other and doing stuff in a very systematic way, because as people have been saying, taking statues down is a kind of representational thing. What we're really concerned with is the actual structures of power in the world that we live in at the moment, which are extremely distorted and leading to lives of incredibility and risk, and both in wherever we are. Here in Oxford, where I live, where I live down the road from Femi, not on a boat, in a house, but we have many problems here in Oxford with racism, policing, immigration, raids, all kinds of things that are going on. So we just have to kind of do stuff here locally in our current everyday lives that can really build that change, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about decolonial change.
Okay, thank you. And now coming to you, Dr. Les.
Right, so I don't know what Onyekachi thought he was disagreed with. I didn't get that. But one thing you said, which I found quite interesting, was...
No, I said I agreed with you.
Oh, sorry. One of the things what I found interesting, and I know Brother Glenroy definitely knows about this, was in 2006, I was part of a company we were called Newbie Unlimited Learning by Choice. It was my independent research company. And we, in 2006, in fact, in 2005, we created something called Black Friday, Black Liberation African Knowledge Fridays. And throughout the whole of 2006, it's the first time in my life I've ever done it. And when I used to DJ on sound system, I'd chat lyrics 2 times and that was it. But for that year, I did a talk called Fighting the Wilberforce. In fact, it was my brethren, Brother Hakeem, gave me the title because I said to as many people in the community, and I know Brother Glenroy definitely is familiar with this. I said, for 2007, we are going to get the white savior in an unprecedented fashion. That yes, it's 200 years since the so-called abolition, and we're going to get rammed down, we're going to get it rammed down our throats about William Wilberforce as the savior. So in that fight in the Wilberforce, I introduced people to people like Catherine Heinrich of the women's movement, who were the ones who forced William Wilberforce into going from the gradual abolition to the abolition. I spoke about the working class movements from up north, who were some of the main drivers behind the critical changes that occurred, you know, in Britain with the context of abolition. And there's a wonderful play by a wonderful sister called Juliet Gilkes Romero called The Whip, which is at the Shakespeare, you know, in Shakespeare land, Stratford upon Avon. But I am saying to everybody, if you want a really good account of that whole thing that led up to the so-called abolitionist movements, take in that play. But for me, what is really significant, and Marcus Garvey said this, he said, you know, a thinking man and woman is already man and woman, but a writing man and woman are exact. And I've always said we have to counter these narratives. And I know Onya Kachi, I know you do this. Sister Alima is on that journey. You know, I didn't know Femi was a poet, but that's what we're trying to do. Because we have to, you know, I'm a martial artist. We learn to fight and strike from all angles. And to me, as peoples of African ancestry, in this particular moment, we need to fight from all angles. As they said, you can't eat an elephant in one bite, you have to take little nibbles.
Thank you. We do have an audience question. I just want to check to see if Kendall, can you ask if they want to come on screen? They want to turn their camera on and come on and ask the question. Is it Usula? And whilst we're finding out if Usula wants to come on camera, Femi, what's your response to how do we go about decolonizing our daily lives? How does that look? Is it a singular thing? Is it a joint thing? Is it something we need to take ownership of? Is it about self-sufficiency? What does it look like?
So it's about all sorts of stuff, right? Colonialism, as has been said, is what literally shaped the modern world, and so it kind of runs through every interaction we have, depending no matter the kind of setting. When someone is like, oh, can I? So you have the idea of microaggressions and everyday colonialism, right? Everyday colonialism is the kind of microaggression side, and it's making sure that you tie things in on a wider sense. You see things like skin lightening in our communities as a result of colonialism. You see things like the natural hair movement as a anti-colonial movement. All of these kind of small things that might seem small on the face of it, are all part of the wider idea of reframing the world, which we've been kind of left with. And then in the same way, I guess for those of us in the diaspora especially, and as you can see throughout the film, there's an element to which I get there and I'm kind of not here or not there in a way yet. And so I think learning about our culture, those of us in the diaspora, and also acknowledging sometimes the privilege we have in the diaspora, second generation. I have a British passport. I can go almost anywhere in the world.
Absolutely.
Without a visa. I can send back remittances in order to help people back home, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of recognizing yourself as a person in the colonial metropole, as we all are here in the UK, and then also challenging the small microaggressions levels, and then as well challenging history, right? Doing things like having conversations like this where we start to reframe the conversation, and making films about French colonial officers in West Africa, doing all the things that actually kind of everything that kind of reframes the world and unlearns the world which we were left by as we have rightfully been told, a load of middle or maybe even upper class white men in offices in the UK and in Berlin.
Thank you, Femi. We do have a question from Fez. If you want to switch your camera on, and Kendall, if you could make that happen. I'm trying to look for your question now. I'm trying to multitask, guys. I'm not very good at it. Brilliant. Hi, Fez. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I don't know why it's Fez. It's actually Femi.
Oh.
Yeah, it's me who put that there. Hi, thank you. Thank you, Femi. That was a really powerful movie. My question is, because I saw in the poll that was written, it talks about reparations. So my question is how reparations from Europe can have an impact on Africa or African nations when the leaders, many of the leaders, are still quite colonized or very dependent on the same European powers for security, for credit and aid. So, like, how could reparations have any impact on African nations?
I think that's the part of the point, right? Is that to begin with reparations, we need to acknowledge that the thing hasn't finished. The colonialism is still going on. It's neo-colonial now. France, as we see in the film, still controls the uranium outflow from Niger in order to kind of fuel its own domestic energy use, whilst only 10% of Nigerians have access to electricity, and it doesn't even tell the workers that uranium is radioactive or give them any protective equipment, so they end up with cancer, right? Yes, I understand the questions but again, that's allowed in some ways, and this is possibly as well why the film may be controversial even when we bring it to Niger, because there's always some degree to which government officials are going to be sometimes even placed there. I'm not saying in the Nigerian case particularly, but especially in French Africa, there's a whole history of coups after coups after coups because the French don't like someone, and so they put in a politician that will help them, like Ali Bongo helped to supply the oil to the ELF company in terms of the ELF oil scandal. If anyone knows about that, Ali Bongo was installed basically by the French, and then for 40 years helped the French siphon oil out of the country. We had the coup. We had in Burkina Faso, the French were in on the murder of Thomas Sankara, and then we had we had Compaoré there for the next 30 years. In the Congo, Patrice Lumumba was killed by the French, the Belgians, and the USA, and Mobutu Sese Seko was there for 30 years, I believe, helping to steal the country's resources. And so while we still have these neo-colonial systems in place, I understand what was that you, Glenroy, saying what debt? Yeah, the debt has been paid, but the debt is still there in monetary terms, right? There's still the debt. There was no debt in the first place.
That's
the
right.
idea that there's structural adjustment debts that are owed to the West by the debt is, as we're saying, from the actual debt is from the West to the ex-colonized. They are the ones in debt to us. However, the structure, the language that the World Bank and the IMF use are about debt means that supposedly we owe them, and you even have interest on this debt, which bills, and then through what's called structural adjustment policy, that's used to basically force policies on these developing nations. And so basically they were not yet really beyond the colonial period in some ways. And you are right in saying that monetary, even monetary kind of supposed reparations that then just go and are pocketed by some kind of tin pot dictator who's been installed there by European power in the first place is not going to get us anywhere. So definitely with the reparations movement, an acknowledgement of the ongoing nature of colonialism is necessary, and the reversal, cancellation of all ideas of debt for one, and the reversal of these neo-colonial structures has to be part of, or at least part of that reparation. Otherwise, it's not going to have any real material effects.
Thank you. We also, oh, Glenroy, okay, can I just say, Ursula, if you could switch your camera on, please, so that you can ask the panel your question. Glenroy, I'll go to you, and then we're waiting for Ursula.
I'll try to be quick, because I know others want to come in. Okay, Jan Lasers wants to say so. Look, this idea, we can't seem to educate people beyond. The reparation is not about money.
No.
It's not about money. It's about changing the relationship between the exploiters and the people being exploited. Now, revolution is the best way, but we're not going to have that too quickly. So some of the things that need to change is the way in which so-called trading of resource is taking place. It's a theft. Colonialism has never ended. It just changed its name. So we need to stop those kind of things, you know. And the reality is, I would say, if we had 1 week of the West stop stealing African wealth, then a very major shift will occur within our economy. But I really wanted to respond to what Les was talking about earlier on, about that period in 2006 and running up to 2000. I remember it well, Les, because we made so many inroads and had so many events to make sure it didn't stay some kind of celebration by the enslavers.
Yeah.
You know, and our union, the RMT, had the first reparation conference that you spoke at, and a number.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And it's still going. It's still going. We're now 14 years into it. The reality is that we've done many, many things to try and undo that lie that they were trying to tell us. Just look at history. In 1833, I think it was, that Sam Sharp led a rebellion. Well, if it was over in 1807, what was he rebelling against?
Yeah.
The practice was a continuation. The intention was to continue to exploit our people, ask them to work 40 odd hours for free. And when people talk about the amount of money that was given to the enslavers, enslaved people were asked to pay for that.
Absolutely.
Right? We were part of that payment. So yes, 2015, we were still paying for it. But our ancestors were exploited to the point of stealing their labor after enslavement was supposed to have ended. But I know others want to come in, but that for me is an important chapter. Reparation is about repair, not about checking the post.
Yeah.
Where are we going to put it? In the bank?
Yeah, true.
Dr. Les and Anya Cheki, can I just ask you to just hold those thoughts, stick a pin. Let me just take this question from the audience, and then we're going to come right back to you, because there are 3 more questions from the audience that I do want to slip in, and then we can come back to your points. Will that be okay, my brothers?
Good.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, Ursula, ask your question.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, really. Just thank you so much for the film. But my question was about the film, actually, because I think one of the most powerful things about it was the way that you were able to elicit these critiques of colonialism from the people who were themselves colonized, right? And some of the most powerful scenes, like with those young teenage girls sitting there on the wall talking about their anger, their sorrow. And that I've never seen that on film like that, where Africans who have been are permitted to express their anger or given that space to express their anger. And it just blew me away. And I wondered how, because I assumed actually that, I assumed the filmmaker was Black. I assumed, because I think there's so many situations where people are not, would not feel able to say that in front of a white filmmaker. So I wondered how Femi and Rob and the team, how you went about filming those scenes and gaining entry to those communities and negotiating those. How did you establish that setup so that those people were able to say that, to speak the truth to power in effect? Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to ask my question.
You're welcome. Femi?
So Rob had gone on a recon mission to Niger before we went together, and he had kind of initially established contact with some of these communities and started to build some relationships there. But I do think that even though the film explores, firstly, I learned some Hausa for the film, so I was able to communicate with the people kind of directly in some ways, and you see that it improves throughout the film, Hausa being the native language. And so in some of the later scenes, I'm singing Hausa with the people there.
Yeah, that was the bomb, mate. That was the bomb.
Yeah, I thought it was Hausa. It was brilliant. I was like, is that Hausa?
Yeah.
It was. And then in the scene, the drummer of Dankori, I'm kind of teaching telling some of the older men about the contents of the books in Hausa. And so I kind of learned more and more of the culture and the language. And obviously I look like them. And I had Amina and Hassan as kind of go-betweens. And so definitely things like in the scene at the drummer of Dankori, again, when you see the scene where the guy says, where he says it's the first time a real person died here. Club being the first real person, right? It's the first time a real person died here. Up until now, all the Africans, they didn't mean anything. It's the first time someone actually died. I remember very well trying to ask the question in about 4 different ways, because that's kind of what I wanted him to say. So I was like, "Do you think that the Africans matter?" And eventually he was like, "Oh yeah, no. And then obviously we don't use me asking the question bit because we have to trim down the film to 1.5 hours. So we get the compelling moment, and then we kind of go with it. But for sure, I think that there was a connection that I had with the people by virtue of just being obviously of African and of African descent, and speaking to them, and the emotion, the connections that I make, as you can see throughout, and as you can see as well with the pivotal scene with Amina and Hassan, are kind of the connections that I have deepen beyond, because at the beginning the emotional I have to have that very, 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 very very intense conversation with Amina and Hassan for them to say, okay, you need to open up and show more of what is underneath. But for sure, I think that it was a combination of the actual real spontaneous interaction of being there, and a lot of reconnaissance work which had been done before, just based on even nothing to do with the actual necessary, like, in-person connection, but more just logistics of going through somewhere where there's Boko Haram, where you see we have to have the soldiers with us, where there's a lot of security issues, where there's a lot of stories that have to be told. And I really take my hat off to Rob for having done a very, very strong reconnaissance mission beforehand to have kind of managed to get us that access. You have anything to add, Rob?
No, you said it all. Good, very good. Maybe more questions.
Amazing.
Thanks for your question, Ursula. Okay, Anya Kachi, what was your point? I think you had your hand up in response to Glenroy on the previous question. Would you like to expand on that?
The point was just about global inequality and how we need to really address that, and the reparations conversation is part of that context. A few years ago, the BBC made a program called, I think it was Welcome to Lagos, and they looked at some of the struggling communities in Lagos. A lot of the middle class Nigerians really didn't like the program because it somehow didn't do whatever they wanted for their self-esteem, but it focused on ordinary Nigerians struggling through life. And there was one film that dealt with a group of people who worked on a rubbish tip. And on one occasion, the gang were kind of joking with each other. There was a guy from the Niger Delta, which is the oil part of Nigeria. And they were taking a mickey out of him. And he basically turned around and said, I don't know why you're doing that. In my village, there's an oil well. And you're sort of struck by this statement where the guy has an oil well that's been pumping oil out of his village for the last 50 years, and he's on a rubbish tip. And this resource is fueling civilization in London and everywhere else. And he's on a rubbish tip, scavenging. So there's something about global inequality and how we begin to process this. And this conversation needs to be really about that. And then the second point I was just going to make very quickly was, I mean, if I have one criticism of the film, we were talking about the local collusion. If I have one criticism of the film, it is that we didn't deal, the dialectic was between North and South, white and black, and there wasn't really an intra-black dialectic because there's always been African collusion. I was quite interested in how the French officer makes his way across, destroying all the villages. He's of course using African troops on the whole to do that. And at the end, when they're all tired of him, they shoot him. But why do they collude through this process? So there's something about that intra-African discourse that was absent there that I would like to have seen more of. You talk to the priest, who is the Bori priest, the local traditional belief system that was there before Islam. And Boko Haram was also mentioned, and Boko Haram war both with the West and with the traditional African structure. And the film does not really kind of deal with that in a way. There's no commentary on it, and I would have wanted more on that. But yes, that collusion, the way that resources are taken out, and how all of this fits into a global system, who benefits from that, who is marginalized, is that within that process is something that I would have wanted more on. But that's not, you can't make every film, but I love the film that you did make.
Yeah.
I wanted a little bit more.
We do
There's
have
a lot of things.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Femi. Just to let you know, guys, we do have one more question from the audience. It's Timbuktu YV. They are ready to ask their question. Can I just throw that out there, and then we can wrap up and tie up some of the last loose ends of these discussions? But they are messaging me, so I would like to give them the opportunity. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me clearly. Am I coming through okay? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I just want to first say thank you to Femi for the film. It was absolutely phenomenal. Just so informative, really educational, and obviously told us more about the horror of the slave trade. So we have to commend you for that in what you have done. And I also, I felt when I first joined the chat, there was a lot of talk, and it seemed to be going in what people talk about, which is a lot of Black pain. There's obviously a lot of Black trauma. A lot of people I know will not watch this film because they need to have their hands held through it. It will be too upsetting. But what I wanted to ask was a question about, in a very kind way, I wanted to ask the people in the audience who are not Black, the European people. I really wanted to know, to get a sense of how you felt watching the film. And also, because you probably have privy to experiences that we don't have. You'll hear things, you'll see things about racism which we don't hear. And I wanted to know what your particular views would be on how to dismantle white supremacy. So that's two questions, how you felt about the film. And secondly, what your personal, educated, or otherwise view would be about how to dismantle white supremacy. So that's to the people who are of European origin in the audience. If you don't mind asking that question, I'd be really appreciated, because we don't often hear that perspective, and it will be really useful for people if they feel at ease to do that. We'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, if audience members want to respond, that would be great. Maybe Rob, you can pick up on that. But I did want to let Femi finish off his point in response to the other question that came up before. So if you could just do on that, and then I will check through the chat to see if we have any responses, and then Rob, you can talk on that.
Yeah, I was just going to respond and say definitely we could have included more on that. There's a load of things that we wanted to include in the film that we just didn't include, because there's so many different layers that we're already trying to fit in. We're trying to fit in neocolonialism and uranium. We're trying to fit in the actual story of Villay in a kind of fictionalized drama way. We're trying to fit in the references to the literature. We're trying to fit in the idea that it's not just this one guy, it's France, and that it's not just France, it's also Germany, it's also Belgium, and even like things that we did film with Saraunia, the queen of that led one of the resistances to Villay. We filmed with her, one of her great granddaughters, and we didn't get to. Rob always says, and I am in agreement, we didn't tell enough about the resistance that the Nigerian people gave to Villay, because they did put up a very good fight, and if it weren't for the superior weapons, there's a good chance that they would have lost this battle. It's just literally it's the same that happened in Omdurman and in with Cecil Rhodes. The idea that these guys, they didn't have machine guns in this case, although Villay did ask for machine guns and he was told no, but they definitely had better weapons. And you see in one scene, the guy says, we thought that their bullets were haricot beans, right? And so definitely, I would say there's so much stuff that we would have and could have and should have included, but the film wouldn't have fit our 1.5 hour kind of BBC BFI cut length. And it's always the hallmark of a good film, the hallmark of a good film, I think, is what you leave on the editing table, because you always have to kind of squeeze in and pick and choose bits and bobs. But I completely understand your criticism, and I think definitely we could have included more of that.
Alima?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the point that was raised, because I think it ties these conversations neatly together. Yeah. The question that I think Timbuktu.
Yes, Timbuktu asked. There are some responses coming in, so
right. So I think actually the point that the person put forward is actually really important in thinking about these conversations and linking up these questions around repair and reparations, because quite often I feel like people of African descent, Black people, are quite often conscripted into, I guess, trauma porn in a way, and it's having to be put forward constantly to speak about racism, to speak about a very much lived reality of what it feels to be on the margins and so forth. And I think it goes back to thinking about reparations as these little acts of resistance that as individuals, as Black people can adhere to. And Professor Les mentioned Rastafari and so forth. So it's like, for me, I want to kind of put it on a basic level of the everyday Black person and the little things that you can do as a Black person to liberate yourself and to decenter whiteness. And I feel like looking at these conversations from a perspective of decentering whiteness is very, very important, particularly in the context of what Timbuktu was raising against. How is it that I feel like white people need to be part of this conversation, and it's not just Black people that need to constantly be talking about racism and how it feels to be on the margins. And I think this is part of reparations, this is part of repair, this is part of centering a lot of these discussions on liberation, on healing, and moving forward. So I'm really, really happy that Timbuktu raised that point.
It's a very powerful point, and there are some responses coming in. Rob, seeing that you are our only white member on the panel, do you want to throw some light on what was asked?
Well, I'll just be brief, but I hope that others can maybe speak as well after me. If there's, I hope we're not running out of time. I suppose I would just say, if we want to end white supremacy, we have to start with education. You know, we have a government at the moment with a minister who basically said teaching critical race theory is going to be outlawed or is outlawed in schools, and that white privilege is there's no such thing as white privilege. So we really have to start there. We cannot have young children being taught that you know, there's no such thing as white privilege, and there's no such thing as racism, and there's and critical race theory is just some kind of you know, wild, wacky theory. So that has to be right at the center. It has to education of young people to end white supremacy. I mean, in this country or in every country, has to be where we start.
Thank you. We have a response from Susan, and she says, I'm very aware of quite a lot of things that happened in Africa and India. How did I respond to the film? I was hurt. Of course it did. The juxtaposition of the people with the hands and the feet chopped off, that was a very point. Oh, that was such a big point for myself. As punishment, etc. She said it was very powerful. How to solve it? We treat and think of everyone as human beings, have love, respect, caring, and so on. It is widening of the hearts, so it links into the brain by the neck. Thanks for that comment, Susan. I think there is some conversation going in the chat. Dr. Les, would you like to respond to that question?
Right, for me, Neely Fuller Jr. said it, the guy who inspired Frances Cress Welsing to write her book. What is it?
The ISIS Papers.
ISIS Papers. And Neely Fuller Jr. basically said, if white people come up to you and say something like, you know, they appreciate what you're going through, he said they should go and tell it to other white people. And what that basically means is sometimes you need to have those in-house conversations within your little cliques or whatever it is, where you really have the power. Because for me as an African person, and you know, this is why I love what, you know, Alima said, Onikachi said, and Glenroy said, it's about reparative justice. Because people like to trivialize and minimize you know, reparations and make it act like it's a financial thing. No, it's about reparative justice. And that means it's about healing. And the only way we can heal is to have a better grasp of what we have contributed to the storehouse of human knowledge as peoples of African ancestry from before Europeans even knew what it was to be Europeans and civilized. And I'm not one of those people who get out the black flag and claim everything, because to me, that's one bag of foolishness as well. But we know, for instance, that the ancient Africans, and they were Africans in Egypt or Kemet at the time, they educated Europeans. If you read Herodotus and people like that, they don't hide it. They tell you where they were educated. You know, G.M. James has a book called Stolen Legacy. He tells you what boat Socrates took, what boat Herodotus took, how much they paid to go to Africa, how long they spent there. So to me, if we're going to talk about repairing this damage, it's not just about hearing what white people think, which for me is fine. It's about what can we do? Because one of the things Malcolm X said is we need to recognize the commonality of our condition. So if we recognize the commonality of our condition as members of the human family, hopefully we will start to repair those breaches. Because you see the thing about the hands and all that, and Leopold and whatever they did, that was standard European policy. So when they went to places like Canada and they slaughtered the people there, they killed all the buffaloes, mounted them, because what they would do is they would send people like anthropologists into these places, or the early anthropologists, to understand what are these people's world centered around. Once you understand the cosmology, the cosmogony, whatever it is. So for those people, our brothers and sisters, First Nation peoples in places like Canada, the Europeans went in there, and how did the people who were butchering people get paid? They would cut off the ears. For 2 sets of ears, you got X amount of money. And then to add on top of that, they introduced, so General Amherst shipped smallpox infested blankets over from Europe and gave them to the people in places like Canada. So sometimes we have to have the real conversations, because yes, it was, you know, Leopold, and, you know, they said he chopped off arms and heads like how you'd cut down orchids or whatever the flowers were called. I don't remember. But I think that we cannot divorce those treatments from the wider European colonialist, imperialist, racist, white supremacist project.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I think, guys, we are slightly over time. I want to thank all the audience for their participation, and ask you guys to wrap up. Glenroy, your thoughts on the discussions and any last points, any last things you would like to say?
Too much, I would like to say, but I respect the restriction of time. They say time is the enemy. There was a young lady asked a question earlier on about, you know, a particular scene from the movie, and I was very, very moved by that. First time I saw it, I asked Femi about it, or I'll ask him, you know, because the one where the school children are being asked to narrate their feelings about colonialism and what was done, you know, and that really struck at me, that is something that really, it was so natural and real, and, you know, all of it was, but that for me was a very emotional aspect to it, and I paused it. I really just needed to absorb that, and for me, that's an incredible aspect of that. But, you know, the whole idea that finally we will get some effort around telling the true story. No disrespect to Donald Woods, if people remember him. He was a guy who escaped from apartheid South Africa, crossing rivers with crocodiles and what have you. And one of the things that I noticed when his movie about Steve Biko, that it wasn't really about Steve Biko, it was about his journey out of apartheid. I remember saying at the time, we need to actually make sure this is narrated correctly. And I think what I heard from Femi is the fact that all of those other atrocities, Namibia and other places, will be narrated at some point. So whatever we can do to make that possible, Rob and Femi, you know, call out to the community. The ownership by us is very necessary. So thank you very much. Love the movie, love your work. Please continue it.
Thank you. Alima.
Muted.
I'm conscious of time, so I wouldn't take it too long. I would just say that it's important for these conversations to continue. There's always a feeling of like you have these really riveting conversations and then suddenly you close your laptop and it's over. So I've just put my email address in the chat. The work that I'm doing is around the Milligan statue, is around the London Sugar and Savory Gallery. And I want to keep this going. And anybody who's interested in doing history and engaging with all of the things that we've been grappling with, please get in touch with me. And once again, thank you as well, Femi and Rob, for the wonderful film. I think, yeah, big up yourself every time for that is a real kind of resource. So yeah, give thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Les, your final comments, please.
Well, for me, again, you know, I just want to really give thanks to Rob and Femi for an exceptional piece of work for me. As I said, I just love that kind of juxtaposition between the heart of darkness and something that, you know, is irrefutably real. And I will definitely be screening this at University of West London at some point next year, and I will see if I can get Rob and Femi to be part of the panel. It'll probably be virtual, but I think it would be great. So as I said, you know, I really give thanks that you've put that out there and you've given us something else. Yeah, you've given us another framework to have this kind of discussion out of. So yeah, I truly give thanks and take my hat off to both of you. Respect.
Thank you. Onyekachi, your final passing comments?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief as well, and just to thank both Rob and Femi for really good film that has, I think, enriched the conversation.
Yeah.
And really give us the opportunity to look at these big issues again. And I think, I go back to that issue that about the last 500 years, and one of the things that we don't acknowledge enough, and Les said it, and everybody has said it, but we should acknowledge it, that whatever happened in that Atlantic space was co-created by Africans as well as Europeans. And we need to hear more of what happened to Africans in that co-creation of that space. And of course, the third party to that Atlantic triangle were the native populations in the Americas.
Yeah.
And we need to hear their stories as well. So it wasn't a European enterprise. It was an enterprise that was created by three big civilizations, and not everybody benefited as much. And we need to look at, there's an audit going on, and that's going to be an ongoing process. And I think this film will add to those conversations. I think it's going to be an important pillar. It's, we can, Les and the rest of the academics can write long books, myself, and people may not read that, but this gets emotionally to the point and gets these conversations going in a completely different way.
Well, if you don't want to read the books, listen to my rhymes. Listen to Femi's rhymes.
Yeah,
that's why we rhyme.
Well, we all got into this in the 70s because of reggae and music. So the popular ways of beginning this conversation. And,
absolutely.
I have to say that for me, it was roots reggae that opened up the conversation for me.
Most of us.
I hope you guys are doing the 20s version of roots reggae with this film. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And any final passing comments?
Just really briefly, thank you to all of you. I just find this really moving. I'm really excited that you have all responded so just imaginatively and enthusiastically to our work. And I really hope that we can keep taking it forward. So I'm just really moved, and thank you very much for everybody for your amazing responses. And on a lighter note, tomorrow morning I'll make sure I put a Spotify list with our soundtrack on Spotify. So I don't know if there's a way we can share that, but I'll send it to Sarah and she can get it out to everyone.
Thank you so much. And finally, Femi, your passing comment.
Yes, just really great to see some old faces, new faces, and have a great discussion come off the back of the film that we did, and tell all your friends to watch it. It will be on BBC, and once it's on BBC, it will then be on the iPlayer for a whole year, which means that anyone who either has a TV license or doesn't mind ticking a box that says I have a TV license, even if they don't, can watch it in the UK, or with a VPN if you're anywhere else. So once that's there, make sure you share far and wide. And if you want to share quicker, we're still on till Sunday. We have other screenings, and even though they're all technically linked to a certain geography, because they're all on Zoom, because we live in Corona world, anyone can really log on, and you'll just be watching panelists who don't come from down the road from you. So make sure, if you can either share the fact that this is still going on, and you can do that through our website. You can find the links to the rest of the free screenings the rest of this week till Sunday. And if not, then once it's on the iPlayer, share it. Thanks.
Okay.
Your birthday, Femi, got 2 more hours to go.
I was going to say to everybody, thanks for doing that, Femi, because my final comments are thank you for everybody that took part, the audience, the panelists. Want to thank everybody who came through the Eventbrite. Also spread the word about there are still 2 more screenings to go, and it's going to be really exciting, and you can jump back on. Also remember the hashtags, #time to testify, hashtag African Apocalypse Tour, hashtag Be a Witness, hashtag No Justice, No Peace. And also get involved, people, get involved with local organizations, campaigns. Now is the time for us to bring change. Thank you all. You are amazing.
Give thanks, Sarah. Well done.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Have a blessed evening, everyone.
Now I need to respond to all the phone calls I've been rejecting. Wishing me happy birthday. This whole call I've had
happy birthday.
I'm like, deny.
Yeah.
So I need to call them all back now before it gets too late.
Yeah. Well, no, that was great. That was great.
All right.
So, Sarah, you're a Forest Hill girl, are you?
No, actually, I'm going to be truthful with you now. I grew up in Bricky, but